Get comfortable because this will not be a waste of time. Welcome to a talk that will change your life forever. You've seen death by PowerPoint before, but not like this. This is much, much worse. But if you pay attention, this talk will make you younger, more beautiful, more popular, and wealthier than you ever imagined. You'll be able to eat whatever you want and not gain a single pound. The 3 Dirty Little Secrets of Failure is a life-altering, mind-blowing experience that will change the way you think about failure from now until the day you die. And because I said it in my epic, yet humorous voice, you are now in a state to pretty much accept anything we tell you. For now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the 3 Dirty Little Secrets of Failure with Mark Botros.
Hello and welcome to the 3 Dirty Little Secrets of Failure. My name is Mark Botros. For those of you who want the bottom line up front, here you go. Dirty little secret number 1 is failure is a frame, not the whole movie. Dirty little secret number 2 is the road to success is paved with failure, among other things. And dirty little secret number 3 is you may not embrace failure, but the greats do. When I was younger, I always did well in school. I was always either a straight A student or close to it. When I got to college, in my first semester of engineering school at Drexel University, my father pulled me aside. He was an entrepreneur at the time, and as an entrepreneur, sometimes times are really good and sometimes they're not. So at the time when I was starting to go to school, times weren't so great at that moment. And so he pulled me aside and did probably the most gut-wrenching thing that a father could do for his son, and that was to tell me that he couldn't afford to put me through school. School was very expensive, and I had to figure out a way very quickly to earn my way through school or work my way through school. So I got a job, and my job was sorting packages at night. Now, mind you, engineering is a rigorous way to go to school. In fact, on my first day of school, the dean of the School of Engineering said, look to your right, look to your left. Only one of you is going to be here at graduation. In my case, he was right. I went to school during the day while working at night. I would work till 3, 4 in the morning while trying to get up for 8 a.m. calculus. Now, you can imagine that this was not a recipe for success. My grades progressively got worse, and ultimately, I failed out of engineering school with a 0.96 GPA. 0.96. You really have to work hard to fail that spectacularly. And for someone who had always been a good student, that really did a number on my head. I had always prided myself on getting good grades and being an achiever. And for the first time in my life, I had to face failure. I was ashamed, vulnerable. I got depressed. It really messed with my self-esteem and my self-image in a huge way. And it didn't help the fact that I actually got hurt on the job. So the very thing that was actually funding my way through school was now threatened. So it was a really tough time for me, and I didn't know how I was going to get out of this. Question for you. What was a failure that you had that you're ashamed to say out loud? For me, saying that I failed out of school with a 0.96, that's pretty shameful for me. Another thought question for you. How do you treat yourself when you fail? Historically, I beat myself up. Here's what my friend Mike Hertz has to say about failure on a recent podcast episode that he and I recorded together.
What do you think is the biggest impediment to people's confidence?
I think that the biggest impediment is that when people fail at a task, they determine that failure is, instead of saying, my kid's on a math test, they get a bad grade on a math test, and they can either say, I did bad on that test, on that concept, that piece of material, or they could say, I'm bad at math. I think that
Right.
people that are confident recognize they attribute bad outcomes to either they were unprepared and they could have done more beforehand, or it's just a one-off, a bad day. I was sick that day. I didn't study as much as I should. So I think that's the biggest impediment, is that people overgeneralize failure causes.
So my advice after listening to Mike is don't judge your entire self based on one bad moment, one bad grade, one bad quarter, one bad year, as was my case in college, or even one bad decade. It's never too late to turn it around. Author John Sinclair once said, failure is a bruise, not a tattoo. What I learned from this is that I'm not a bad student. I just made bad decisions. Ultimately, I was able to turn it around. I got myself back into Drexel University. I raised my GPA. to almost a 3.0. And then I transferred to community college, got a 4.0, and then actually transferred all of those credits to University of Maryland, where I finished my bachelor's degree 12 years later, and then went on to get my master's in strategy and technology management. It was an MBA. So what I learned from that whole experience is that I'm not a bad student. I just made bad decisions. That you can overcome depression. It is possible, because I fell into a deep depression and I was able to come out of it. And the last thing I realized was that if I show up and study and do the work, I will pass. And I might even do well. Dirty little secret number 2. The road to success is paved with failure, among other things. If success was a road, what do you think it would be paved with? I think we can safely say that success is not just failure, that it's paved with persistence, hard work, learning, growing, developing. It's not something that comes overnight. But when we think of failure on that path, failure is definitely one of the paving stones on that cobblestone path to success. One time I had a job where failure literally was the job description. I spent the better part of a decade of my life working in proposals, and I still do it today as part of my job. When I used to lead proposals, and what that means is I used to put together multi-million and multi-billion dollar opportunities for a large IT provider. And the kind of opportunities that I was put on were usually the most risky, the most innovative, the biggest moonshot opportunities that we had. So let me put it in perspective. The industry in government contracting is such that a company will win maybe 25% of all the opportunities that they bid. So most of their bids are going to end up as losses. The opportunities that I was supporting were even more risky than that. So my chances of winning were something closer to maybe 5% or 10%. I would show up to work knowing that the outcome was probably 90 to 95% stacked against us. I was literally walking into a job where failure was the job description. Let me ask you this. How often do you feel afraid of failure? What is your relationship to fear? Do you think businesses embrace failure? Why or why not? I think that failure is something that companies and people don't aspire to. And I think the reason why is because failure can be expensive. It means that we expend resources on something that did not deliver a benefit that we might hope for. I think we as people don't aspire to fail because we fail to see the lessons that are in failure. We are goal-oriented and success-oriented. And anything that gets in the way of that, we tend to associate negative feelings with failure. So failure is not something I think we generally aspire to, but it's something that we need to learn to embrace. Yet, failure is inevitable, despite our best attempts to avoid it. How do we know that failure happens? Here's a great list. How about Yelp and Amazon reviews, customer service hotlines, help desks, call centers? Disney has its own guest relations department, warranties, money-back guarantees, and the Better Business Bureau. Failure happens. Failure is actually a statistical part of business today. In fact, they have all of this infrastructure to accommodate when failure happens. So failure is an inevitability, not something that we can hope to avoid. Failure is also a rite of passage. When we see failure the right way, we see it as an opportunity to learn, grow, and expand, not as something to be avoided. When we have failed spectacularly, then we are in good company. I would say that anyone who has really accomplished anything great in their life has failed at a really high level or on a really big thing before they achieved that great success. I think that they probably saw a lot of failure on their road to achieving their goal. What do you think people are so afraid of? I think that people are afraid of all kinds of things. People are afraid of speaking. They're afraid of looking bad. They're afraid of rejection. They're afraid of not being loved, not being enough, not being worthy. I asked my friend Anela Matoyer, who is a coach and consultant. She was also the city president for Capital One in Houston. Here's what she has to say about the root cause of fear.
The root cause, I will tell you, it's fear of failure. It's people just don't want to fail. And I'm not going to ask that because if they're going to say no, I always laugh at my sisters. I have three sisters. And if we're going to do something that has to do with the family, no, you ask, Canelo, because you're not afraid to ask. And I'm not afraid to ask, what's the worst that could happen? They're going to tell you no. Okay. Ask a different way.
So my friend Anella says, hey, just ask. What's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to tell you no? Can't hurt. Brene Brown, who was made famous by her TED Talk on vulnerability and shame, she says a couple of really great things about failure. She says, you're going to know failure if you're brave with your life. The things that I learned as a result of working a job where failure is literally the job description is that repeated failure gets you to your goal faster, and that there's huge value in doing the job that nobody wants. Who wants to take a job where failure is the job description? The other lesson I learned is that failure is only good if you learn and improve. In that job, I actually helped to bring in more than $10 billion of new business to that company. So while there was a lot of failure along the way, when we had those successes, they were huge. Dirty little secret number 3, you may not embrace failure, but the greats do. Sometimes we're not always in control of our failures. In 2020, March of 2020, I was laid off from my job. I was a senior manager with a company. We had done incredibly well on the contract that I had led. I led a team of about 25 people. It was about a $25 million contract. And when it ended actually right as the pandemic was taking off and right when the pandemic shutdowns were happening. We didn't really know how long this pandemic was going to last, how long we would need to be working from home, all of those things. So when our contract ended, March 31st, 2020, the company made the difficult decision to lay me off. Even though I did all the right things, played it safe, managed my risk, knew all the right people, but sometimes our failures are out of our control. We can do all the right things and still have the outcome that we don't want or expect. My friend Chris Pearmond is a celebrity wine mogul here in Virginia. He owns and is the managing director of 3 wineries here and actually helped to start nearly 20 wineries all across Virginia. And he abides by a rule called the 110-3 rule. The way he describes it is like this. You come up with 100 ideas. You throw 10 against the wall to see which ones will stick, and then 3 that you actually invest in and make happen. Think about the level of what we'll call failure or the level of elimination that happens. So that's 97 ideas out of 100 that get eliminated before landing on 3 ideas that actually get invested in. So those that accomplish great things actually experience a lot of what we would call failures. One of the most successful businessmen in US history is Walt Disney. Yet, one of the things that is little discussed in his life is what a struggle he had early on to launch his company. If we look at a timeline of his life, in 1921, he actually declared his first bankruptcy, first, meaning that there were others. In 1928, he released the successful Steamboat Willie cartoon that put him on the map. By 1937, he released Snow White, which put his studio on the map. But one of the things that people don't really talk about is that Snow White almost didn't happen. It was way over budget. It went way beyond the schedule that they anticipated. But it was such a critical success for Disney that they were able to go on and make Pinocchio, Fantasia, Bambi, Cinderella, and they even established Disneyland in 1955. In 1965, he established Walt Disney World and actually died a year into its construction. But by the end of his life, his accomplishments were simply remarkable. Here's just a sample of them. 26 Academy Awards, 3 Golden Globes, 1 Emmy, and a net worth at his death of $5 billion in the 60s. That would be something like $42 billion today. So by every measure, Walt Disney was an enormous success. But early on, he had plenty of opportunity to quit. And he had a lot of failure along the way before reaching this pinnacle of success. You can't talk about failure without talking about Thomas Edison. Over 1,000 patents, with 500 to 600 of them that he either didn't finish or were rejected. And you can see how many patents he had and what they were for, many of them for technologies that we still use today. He's considered by many to be the father of the modern era of technology. And he worked well into his 80s. Take that, retirement industry. He was credited with saying, "Our greatest weakness lies in giving up. The most certain way to succeed is always to try, just one more time." One time he was pressed by a reporter who said, "You've failed so many times. How do you deal with that failure?" He responded by saying, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." A thought question for you. In sales and marketing, how many exposures until someone can be convinced or sold on an idea, product, or service? A lot of times, salespeople, talented salespeople, will probably reach out to a prospect maybe once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times before they hang it up. On average, before a person will be convinced to buy an idea, product, or service, they need a minimum of 7 to 8 exposures. Think about that. So the most persistent salespeople who are willing to take no for an answer up to 7 or 8 times do disproportionately better because it takes that many exposures to the idea, product, or service to convince someone of it. Have you ever done theater or auditions? Failure is part and parcel to doing theater and auditions. When I was younger, I actually sang on a cruise ship for a couple of years. And one of the things that we would do for fun is whenever we were in port is we would go and do auditions in the local city. One time we decided to go up to New York because we said, we're going to go audition for another big cruise line. And if we got onto that cruise line, it would just be amazing. And we all went with no expectation of getting hired. And it happened. None of us got hired. But if you are in theater, auditioning is part of your life. And you will do a lot more auditions before you get a viable part. One time, I auditioned for NBC's The Voice. And while the producer said I was promising, I didn't get in. Jim Carrey, one of the most entertaining actors in Hollywood, early in his career was reported to have slept in his car for his dream of being an actor. And despite the fact that he had humble beginnings, he won at least 2 Golden Globes, 10 MTV Movie and TV Awards, and is still among the highest paid actors in Hollywood. You can't talk about failure without talking about Colonel Sanders. Yes, the face of Kentucky Fried Chicken was actually a real person. His story is remarkable because he had a series of businesses throughout his life, and he didn't actually become a professional chef until he was 40 years old. He franchised Kentucky Fried Chicken, or the recipe for Kentucky Fried Chicken, at age 62 and didn't become the recognizable icon that he is until he was 75 years old. What's really startling about his story is that he visited at least 600 restaurants. He would just drive around to different restaurants all over the country trying to find a restaurant that would pay him a royalty for his chicken recipe. Over 600 restaurants. How many of us would quit after the first 20? This was a man who was the epitome of persistence. And it paid off. We need to see failure as part of the path. Like Colonel Sanders getting a rejection, he just simply moved on until he got a yes. And sometimes failure is like that. It's part of the path. And every no that we get, every rejection that we get is simply a step closer to yes. Brene Brown says something else here about failure. She says, there is no innovation and creativity without failure, period. Some of the biggest companies out there are embracing failure. Coca-Cola, Amazon, and certainly Netflix. Coca-Cola several years ago experimented with something called New Coke. It's a new recipe that they decided to try. They put it out and it failed. It failed so badly, in fact, that they actually had to issue a public apology through a commercial where they then reintroduced classic Coke along with New Coke. And they learned a dear lesson with New Coke, such that they didn't take any big risks for many years until the current CEO who took over Coke and said, we've become too risk averse since that time, and we need to make bigger bets and we need to take greater risks. Amazon, the behemoth that exploded over the last decade or so, and has been the saving grace of many during the pandemic, made a lot of really bold bets that failed, actually. Amazon had a host of failures. Askville, which is like Quora, WebPay, which is like PayPal or Venmo, and Endless, which was a high-end line that folded and eventually got folded into Amazon Fashion. So you can't really accomplish great things without figuring out what you're not good at. And these were things that just simply weren't successes for them. And at some point they said, we just have to cut them off. And they did, or they folded them into some other line that they had. Netflix has a reputation for data-driven decision-making. And one of the things that they've been saying recently is we at Netflix need a higher cancel rate. They've had so many critical successes and so many award-winning shows that they realized that they probably need a little bit more failure, actually. They said, we need to increase our cancel rate. So what they're doing now is they're looking at numbers even more critically to see about canceling more shows so that they can really invest in those shows that work. When you think about failure, you can't help but think about these iconic personalities. Oprah, P.T. Barnum, Dave Ramsey, MC Hammer. Abraham Lincoln failed so much, he literally failed his way to the presidency. And Willie Nelson, some more greats. Michael Jordan, George Foreman, Cyndi Lauper, Elton John, George Lucas. Did you know that Star Wars almost didn't happen? And you may recognize the author of this book, the Harry Potter series. Author Mel Robbins says, success is a numbers game. You're not going to win if you keep telling yourself to wait. The more often you choose courage, the more likely you'll succeed. Arguably one of the greatest athletes of our time, certainly one of the greatest basketball players of our time, is Michael Jordan. This is what he had to say about failure.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed.
Ray Kroc, the founder of the McDonald's franchise, by the end of his life, he had 7,500 stores, $8 billion in sales, and a personal fortune of $600 million, which would be the equivalent of $1.5 billion today. And over the course of his and his wife's life, they gave away pretty much their entire fortune to the tune of $2.7 billion to charity. This is what Ray Kroc had to say about failure.
Now, I know what you're thinking. How the heck does a 52-year-old over-the-hill milkshake machine salesman build a fast food empire with 1,600 restaurants in 50 states, 5 foreign countries, with an annual revenue of in the neighborhood of $700 million? One word: persistence. Nothing in this world can take the place of good old persistence. Talent won't. Nothing's more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius won't. Unrecognized genius is practically a cliche. Education won't. Why, the world is full of educated fools. Persistence and determination alone are all powerful.
That was Michael Keaton playing Ray Kroc in the movie The Founder. J.K. Rowling is arguably one of the most successful authors of our time. This is what she had to say about failure.
7 years after my graduation day, I had failed on an epic scale. An exceptionally short-lived marriage had imploded, and I was jobless, a lone parent, and as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless. The fears that my parents had for me and that I had for myself had both come to pass. And by every usual standard, I was the biggest failure I knew. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that failure is fun. That period of my life was a dark one. And I had no idea that there was going to be what the press has since represented as a kind of fairy tale resolution. I had no idea then how far the tunnel extended, and for a long time, any light at the end of it was a hope rather than a reality. So why do I talk about the benefits of failure? Simply because failure meant a stripping away of the inessential. I stopped pretending to myself that I was anything other than what I was. and began to direct all my energy into finishing the only work that mattered to me. Had I really succeeded at anything else, I might never have found the determination to succeed in the one arena where I believed I truly belonged. I was set free because my greatest fear had been realized, and I was still alive, and I still had a daughter whom I adored, and I had an old typewriter and a big idea. And so rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. You might never fail on the scale I did, but some failure in life is inevitable. It is impossible to live without failing at something, unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default. Failure gave me an inner security that I had never attained by passing examinations. Failure taught me things about myself that I could have learned no other way. I discovered that I had a strong will and more discipline than I had suspected. I also found out that I had friends whose value was truly above the price of rubies. The knowledge that you have emerged wiser and stronger from setbacks means that you are, ever after, secure in your ability to survive. You will never truly know yourself or the strength of your relationships until both have been tested by adversity. Such knowledge is a true gift.
The lessons that I learned from being laid off was that sometimes things really are out of your control and there's nothing you can do about them. I learned that playing it safe doesn't prevent our worst fears from happening. I learned that attitude is everything in a crisis, and that in those situations, what you do next makes all the difference. Every next action matters. Am I going to take an action that's going to push me forward, or am I going to make a decision that will cause me to freeze and maybe fall backward? I also learned that my friends were the thing that saved me, and my family too. And I also learned to see beyond the crisis. I learned who I was. Just like J.K. Rowling said, I realized things about myself that I didn't know before. I'd played safe my whole life. And I learned that all of that work that I had done on myself, all of that time, all of that journaling, all of that meditation, all of the professional, personal development that I had done for years showed me for who I would be in that situation. And I realized that I was a lot more positive, I was a lot more hopeful, and I was a lot more confident than I gave myself credit for. Getting laid off was a gift. And having a failure that I couldn't control taught me a lot about myself and about the way life works. So as I bring this presentation in for a landing, remember 3 things. Failure is a frame, not the whole movie. The road to success is paved with failure, among other things. And you may not embrace failure, but the greats do. How should we see failure? Someone I know has something to say about that.
I have failed in every imaginable area of my life, and some of those failures were absolutely devastating. I could have given up so many times, but I didn't, because I refuse to be a victim. I live in a world of personal responsibility. Your dreams don't come true by doing nothing. You can play it safe, but you will never become the great person you were meant to be, and you will regret the chances and opportunities that passed right by you. Opportunity isn't a blank check with your name on it. Opportunity looks like a lot of hard work. I am living proof that failing forward and failing upward really works. Today, I am genuinely living my dream life, and I'm on the path to make other dreams a reality too. Please don't think I have it all figured out. I don't. And I know I will fail and fall along the way. But I can't let that stop me. Life is too short and too precious to spend the last days of my life regretting that I didn't become who I was meant to become because I was afraid of failure. Failure is the greatest and best life teacher. If you want to live your best life ever, embracing failure is a big part of it. But when you do, you will live a life of greater confidence, humility, grace, peace, and incredible joy. Because you know you failed, but you know you will get back up again. You still need to work hard, persevere, and persist. But you will be less worried about rejection, mediocrity, and not becoming who you were meant to be, because you are becoming that person as you fail. The more you fail, the more you learn, which leads to greater wisdom, better decisions, greater confidence, greater action, which leads to greater success. So take a chance. Fail at something. You are the hero of your own story. And wherever you are right now, you have to believe that life is totally fair, that you get out of it what you put into it. You reap what you sow. You create your own world. It is these beliefs that have enabled me to create a life that I once dreamed about. No matter what happens to you, don't give up. Keep moving forward. Know that along the way you will make mistakes and you will fail. But this is part of the journey. So how should we see failure? Embrace it. Plan for it. Learn from it. Don't repeat it. And no matter what, don't stop. Don't ever, ever stop.
Thank you so much for watching this video. I would love to continue the conversation, so please feel free to join me on any of these platforms. Feel free to reach out to me. I would love to connect with you. And check out my podcast, the LifeWorks podcast, on YouTube and iTunes. Thank you so much.